Hello, I've had some questions about how to organise a literature review, but more specifically, how to use language in a literature review. Some of the questions I've received have been concerning whether, as a student writing a literature review, you need to explain what authors have said or interpret what authors have said. And I wanted to give you some examples so you understand actually what the content of paragraphs in a literature review might look like. So I'm going to share my screen. This is a journal article on wicked problems, teaching super wicked problems, authentic learning about climate change. So you may be writing about this, but I'm not expecting you to write about this, but it's a good example in a published journal of a literature review. So as you can see here, you've got the normal structure of a journal article. You've got an introductory section, an introduction, and then if I just scroll down here, I arrive at the literature review section. It's got really an introductory paragraph that relates to the language and clarifies the definitions. You can see there that there are references. So we've got Rittel and Weber from 1973 and Crowley and Head from 2017. And at the end there, Peters and Tarpey from 2019. So basically in that paragraph, the authors of the journal article are using the words and the ideas of other authors to establish key meanings. Basically, they're establishing the meaning of wicked and super wicked in the context of this piece of writing. You can see it's all written in the third person, and at some points the authors are active. So here we've got Rittel and Weber. At that point they've become the subject of the sentence. Rittel and Weber identified 10 characteristics that distinguished them from tame problems. This is the language of wicked problems and tame problems. You don't need to worry about that. It's more to understand that here the authors of the journal article are using other authors to establish meanings. It's important to note that the authors of the journal article, so let's just clarify who they are. The authors of the journal article are Cross and Congreve. Okay, so Cross and Congreve are using the work of other authors to build their literature review. So back to that point again there, Cross and Congreve, they're not trying to interpret what Rittel and Weber have said. They are just stating what Rittel and Webb said. Rittel and Webb identified 10 characteristics that distinguished them, wicked problems, from tame problems. So basically what they're doing at that point is they are summarizing what Rittel and Weber did. Rittel and Weber identified 10 characteristics that distinguish wicked problems from tame problems. So that's a summary of what Rittel and Weber did. There's nowhere in this paragraph where the authors of this particular journal article are saying this means that, or my interpretation of this is as follows. You don't need to do that in a literature review. All you are doing in a literature review is presenting other people's ideas. Let's look at another paragraph here. So analysis, let's look at this particular sentence here, quite a long sentence here. Analysis shows that many papers referencing Rittel and Weber's seminal paper are in the discipline of geography or those closely associated with it, including environmental science, urban planning, sustainability, development studies, and water resources. That analysis is by Termier et al. So the authors of this journal article haven't gone away and done their own analysis. What they've done is they've drawn on somebody else's analysis and they've summarized Termier et al. In this sentence, starting with the word analysis. Next sentence, the nature of geography as a discipline means that geographers have a knowledge base and skill set that enables them to positively contribute to managing wicked problems, including the methodological diversity within the discipline. That idea comes from Cantor et al. So the authors of this journal article have summarized there what Cantor et al. Say about geographers' skill set. And the authors of this journal article are linking together what Termier et al. Says about the discipline of geography and what Cantor says about the discipline of geography and geographers' skills sets. Okay? But there's no expectation of the authors of this journal article to reinterpret or to restate what these authors are saying. You don't have to say, this means that. What you're doing is you're using other people's ideas to give meaning to your ideas, to put meaning in your argument. So language like this means that, or my interpretation of this is, or an interpretation of this is, doesn't belong in a literature review. The type of literature that you are looking at doesn't need interpretation. You're looking at the work of authors who have already done the interpretation for you. So you're looking at their work and they're making statements and you're using their statements to build your literature review. So there's no need for you to go on in your literature review to explain what other people have said. What you're going to be doing in your literature review is you're going to be summarizing what authors have said. You're going to be quoting directly what authors have said. And you're going to be organizing those direct quotes and those summaries in logical ways in order to create a set of paragraphs to back up the points you're making in your literature review. Note, Cross and Congreve, they use subheadings. Subheadings are very useful in literature reviews. They help map out the key themes or key points you're trying to make. Note the way that they use topic sentences very effectively. So they start the paragraph with a topic sentence. Climate change is widely recognized as the archetypal wicked problem. So I know as a reader that everything in that paragraph is going to come back to that topic sentence. I know that everything in this paragraph is going to be about how the idea of this wicked problem is how climate change is seen as a wicked problem, and that lots of people think that. And you can see looking through here, you know, Helm, Stern, Vivid Economics, they talk about climate change. You can see further on that this stuff from IPCC is about global approaches to reducing CO2. So we know that's about climate change. You can see at the end here stuff about climate change, a super wicked problem from Lazarus. Okay. So again, you've got topic sentences. You've got subheading there, which is about teaching climate change, and then you've got a topic sentence here, a long sentence here. There has been considerable attention since 2019 about climate change and how it's taught in school, and that's a statement of fact. It's what we call an assertion, and at the end of that assertion there in brackets is where this comes from. So the authors of this journal article have gone to Barton. Barton has made it clear that how climate change is taught in school has had a lot of attention. So they simply summarized Barton's idea at the beginning of that paragraph. That doesn't require any further interpretation, as the writers of this journal article don't have to say this means that, or our understanding of this is as follows. You don't need to do that, because already the words, their summary of what Barton has said, does that job for them. So when you're putting your literature review together, you are simply combining direct quotes and summaries of ideas, and you're combining these things, these quotes and these summaries, in logical ways. There's no space there, there's no requirement there for you to say this means that, or my understanding of this is, because you're demonstrating your understanding by summarizing the ideas of authors, and you're also demonstrating your understanding by combining these direct quotes and these summaries in logical ways. The only way that your particular voice might come across more strongly is if you use language that brings two pieces of literature together, and it might be that those two pieces of literature are similar, they're making the same point. So you could use one author in one sentence, and then in the following sentence you use another author and talk about the relationship in terms of the idea between the first author and the second author. So you might write about what the first author says, and then you might say, similarly, this author writes about that subject and is making similar points. So you are bringing your voice in there by pointing out to the reader what the relationship between what author A says and what author B says. So the sorts of words you might use are words like similarly, or in a similar way, okay? Or you might look at difference. So you might use a word like however, which would emphasize a difference between what author A says and what author B says, okay? So your use of language, either at the beginning of a sentence or perhaps at the beginning of a paragraph, will demonstrate your understanding of how one author's ideas relates to another author's ideas. Overall, my recommendation to really get your head around how literature reviews work is to read literature reviews. The more literature reviews you read, the better your understanding will be of how they work, and you'll just become more familiar with the kind of language and the way that authors use literature. I guess the last point I wanted to make was that often, or in some contexts, when we talk about literature, we're talking about kind of English literature, you know, Dickens and Shakespeare and George Eliot. We're talking about literature, the writing of novels and the writing of poetry. And when you're writing about that kind of literature, there is space for interpretation. There is space for saying what Dickens says here means this. My understanding of what Dickens is writing about, Charles Dickens is writing about, is this. So when you're looking at English literature as a subject, then there is space for that kind of language, the language of interpretation. But for our purposes, when in terms of academic writing about the subject of education, when we talk about literature, we're simply talking about stuff that other, particularly researchers, have written to report on their research. We're talking about the stuff that these authors have established as basically being research-informed information. So you don't need to interpret what they're saying. They've already done it for you. You're taking this stuff which they have established, and you are combining this information in new ways. So it's a different understanding of that word literature. So in the context, our context, in the field of education, literature means stuff that researchers and other academics have put together based on their research, or sometimes based on their opinions. But once they've established that body of information, you can use it, and you don't need to explain it or interpret it. You just need to use it in logical ways, and these logical ways establish your understanding.